This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Shiur on Sefer Devorah. So, Baruch Hashem, this is we've been learning it beginning Monday, and we're learning it Monday through Thursday. So, Baruch Hashem, we had a very successful week. And before we begin, let's just speak about the importance of regular study of Musar in general. Although in today's day and age, there are many areas of Torah that people are very dedicated to, certainly with the advent and the excitement of Daf Yomi, Gemara is very popular, and people enjoy learning Nevi'im Ksuvim. Maybe it's not as popular. People learn Mishnayos. However, as we're going to see, despite the fact that all of these things are necessary, they are not the most important learning that a person does regularly, and the most important learning that a person does regularly is the learning of Musar. As we saw yesterday, the Mishnah Berurah paskined already that the study of Musar is actually more critical than any other area of learning, even more, let's say, than the daily study of Mishnayos. So just to share with you a few short statements of the Gedolei Yisrael of the ages about the importance of regular study of Musar. Rabbi Eibeshitz writes in the Yaros Tavash in Chelek Aleph, page Yud Beis, he says, Umi asher b'shem Yisrael yichuna. If you are called a Jew, in other words, not everyone has to learn Musar. Gentiles are exempt from the study of Musar. So don't think that everyone has to learn Musar. But anyone who considers themselves a Jew, mechuyev likroi b'chol yom, is obligated to learn every day. Erev u'boker, evening and morning, eza dafim misifrei Musar, some pages of Musar, so at the very least, a few times a week. Rabbi Salanter, in the Ar Yisrael, in his 23rd letter, he says, Hayahalech ish v'raglayim ein lo, is it possible for a person to walk without legs? Hayashkif ish ve'einayim ein lo, can a person look if he doesn't have eyes? Likewise, it is impossible for a person to have successful learning and avodas Hashem unless he learns Musar regularly. So, here we have it. We don't have anyone greater than Rabbi Eibeshitz, Rabbi Salanter. They say to be a viable Jew, one has to study Musar regularly. Okay, so we're continuing in the Sefer Devorah, and just we mentioned that the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovero, he was great in Nigla as well. In other words, he wasn't just a Makubal, but he was a great halachist. And he actually was a student of none other than the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo. And in fact, he received smicha from Rabbi Yosef Karo. He received smicha from Rabbi Yosef Karo's Rabbi, the Rabbi Yaakov Barav. Very interestingly, we talk about the importance of the Talmud Devorah among the classic Sifrei Musar. So what's interesting is we have the Alter of Kelm made many Kabbalos over the years. We have recorded acceptances that the Alter of Kelm made. One of the Kabbalos that was made by the Alter of Kelm in the year 1892 was he accepted upon himself to learn the Sefer Talmud Devorah on a daily basis. So we continue in the chapter Keil Kamocha, in the edition that I'm using. Again, the learning was Mishmas Sarah Bas Mordechai Halevi. In the edition I'm using, this is on page Ches. In English, it's page 8. Okay, so the Talmud Devorah said that the first Middah is Keil Kamocha. Keil Kamocha indicates that God, you are so tolerant. You suffer insult, which is in a way which the mind cannot fathom. There's nothing beyond the purview of God. In other words, every single moment, every action, every heartbeat, every breath of air, Hashem is sustaining and giving us that function and that ability. There is not a moment of time, there's not a nanosecond which we're not alive based on the infusion of life of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means, says the Talmud Devorah, nobody ever sinned against God that at that moment, mamish, Hashem was not infusing the person with the ability to move, the ability to function, the ability for his mind to send the signal to his arm to do the sin. So that means a person is sinning with God's gift. So why doesn't God say, well, I'm only giving you life for the reasons that I want to give you life. So if you want to use what I'm giving against me, so then go sin on your own koyach, but I'm not going to give it to you. No, Hashem suffers the insult. He continues to be benevolent and give life despite the fact that we use that against the Ribono Shel Olam. Says the Talmud Devorah, Hashem tolerates that grave insult. Okay, now in the Sefer Reishas Chachma, Rabbi Dividas, he gives the following analogy. He says this is like a king who gives money to one of his servants to buy food. The servant is very hungry. And instead of the servant buying food, the servant buys a stick, and he takes the stick and he hits the king. Likewise, God gives us the ability to breathe, and we use that ability, we use the life God gives us to sin against Him. But God doesn't therefore retract and withdraw our capacity to live. Now the truth is, the mashal that the Reishas Chachma gives is not a perfect analogy. Because in the analogy of the Reishas Chachma, once the king gives the Eved money, so now the king can't take back the money is given. So the Eved has the ability to take the money, buy a stick, and use it against the king. But in this scenario, when God gives us life, at the moment we're using that life to sin against God, God could still retract it. So the analogy is not really a perfect analogy. God's tolerance and forbearance is even greater than that king who supplied money to his servant. Now, the Middah Melio points out another very interesting thing. Because in reality, when a person sins, the person is not doing the sin. The person just wants to do the sin and chooses to do the sin, and then God is sort of supplying that person with the energy. In other words, we believe that everything that is accomplished in this world is God doing it. It's just we have the free choice to choose what we want to do, and then God gives us that ability. So in essence, says Middah Melio, let's say a person sins. Let's say they talk by davening. Let's say they eat treif. The truth is, when that person is eating treif, it's God doing it. God is making his teeth go up and down and his tongue mix around the food, and the saliva is excreting juices into the food. It's just all the person did was chose to do that, and then God takes over. So think about the insult that God has to suffer. Because in a sense, because God withdraws himself and he allows himself to do what we choose to do, we, so to speak, are forcing God to help us sin with the energy that God gives us. In other words, it's almost as if we're tying up the hands of Hashem, so to speak, because we know God allows us to exercise free choice, and we're saying, God, I know you let me do whatever I want to do. I am now, so to speak, coercing you to assist me in sinning. What kind of great suffering is that? It's almost like telling the king, I am going to take your hand, and I'm going to use your hand to hit you. Would any king tolerate that? Would any king suffer that? But Hashem allows us to exercise free choice and use it against him. So now the Middah Melio asks a very interesting question. He says, well, what do you want God to do? V'loi toimar, don't say she'eno yachol amnoyim mimenu ha'toivahu. Don't say that, we're in the middle of this chapter of Keil Kamocha. Don't say that Hashem cannot withdraw this capacity. Chas v'shalom, heaven forbid. Shahari b'koichoi kerega berega kamemre. Hashem has the ability in a moment's time liyabish yadav v'raglav, to dry up the person's hands and feet. Meaning Hashem could paralyze a person. Ke'ein she'asa liYeravam, like God did to Yeravam. So don't say God doesn't have the capacity to stop someone from sinning. Of course he has that capacity. V'im kol zeh, nevertheless, sha'hakoyach biyadoi lahachzir hakoyach hanishbahu, even though God has the strength and the ability to retract the benevolence of life that he's giving, he should have said, Kivan sha'ata choite negdi, if you're sinning against me, techta b'shalcha, sin with your own power, v'loi b'shali, and not with my power. No. Loi mipnei zeh mana tuvai min adam. Not because of this does God retract his benevolence from man. Ela soivel elbain. He suffers the insult V'hishpia hakoyach, and he continues to bestow the ability. V'hetiv la'adam tuvai, and he continues to do good to man from his goodness. Hareze elboin, this is a insult, v'savlanos, and a tolerance, ma shelo yeshuar, which is not fathomable. V'yalzeh koirim malachi ashares, and for this reason the heavenly angels call lahakadosh baruch hu melech olav, the God who is forbearing, the insulted God. Of all of God's titles, of all of his great appellations, one of the most important names that God has given is the tolerant God, because he gives us life and we use it against him. Now I just want to share with you a question. What is the Talmud Devorah's question? Well, don't ask that maybe God doesn't have the ability to retract the benevolence he gives us, because we find in Tanakh that he does do such a thing. He paralyzed Achav. What's the question? I would think that God doesn't have the ability to retract and withdraw the goodness he bestows on mankind. Why would I think God is limited, or God doesn't have that capacity? This Sefer was written for ma'aminim, for believers. Certainly we understand that God has this ability. So what's the Talmud Devorah's question? Well, maybe you'll say that once God gives us life, he doesn't retract it. No, the answer is that of course we know God has this ability. But maybe you'll say, this explains Rav Goldberg in his comments on the Talmud Devorah, maybe you'll say, yes, God has the ability, but maybe he'll never do it. Maybe God's hanhaga is that he gives life and he just lets the person enjoy it, and he'll never tamper with the person's life. And in that case, maybe he's not being so tolerant, because he would never withdraw such a thing. And the answer is, it's not true. We find that at times God will withdraw and retract a person's ability. And therefore, since at times God will withdraw and will retract, a person has to understand that at every moment that a person sins, God is deliberating, well, maybe I should take away the person's life. Maybe if he's using his hands against me, if he's using his mouth against me, maybe I should take away that ability. But no, God doesn't take away. He decides to give it, which demonstrates the great tolerance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let's finish the chapter, just so we finish for the weekend. V'hainu oimroi, this is what the Navi teaches us. Mi Keil Kamocha, who God is like you. Keil, according to Talmud Devorah, has two meanings. Number one, Keil is God's Middah of kindness. Like we say, Hashem, Keil Racham Echanun. Ato Keil, you are merciful. Bal Chesed HaMeitiv, the master of kindness who bestows goodness. But Keil also means Bal Koyach, God is powerful, like we say, Mi Chamocha Ba'elim. God, you're powerful. Linakim, to take revenge. V'lasif Eshachan, to gather and withdraw your power. But V'yim Kol Zeh, nevertheless, Atos Soivel, you tolerate. V'nelav, and you're insulted. Ad Yoshev B'tshuva, until you wait until we do tshuva. So think about the ramifications of this Middah. You give somebody goodness, you give your children goodness, you give your friend goodness, you lend him money, you give him a gift. Even if they use the gift against you, continue to help them. What do you mean? I should be a doormat? They should step on me? Learn from the Middos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a big challenge. That's a big, we have what to aspire to. Says the Talmud Devorah, Harezu Middah, this is a character trait, Shetzarcha Adam Lesnahigba, that a person should accustom himself in. Ritzoini, meaning to say, Hasavlonos, tolerance. V'chein heyoisoi ne'elav, we should tolerate, afilu l'madrei gazo, even to this level, that we are tolerant of people who we do good to and they hurt us. The imkolzeh, nevertheless, even though they use it to hurt us, lo yasoif toivasim and amakabel, don't cease your benefit from the recipient. Okay, Rabbi Sai, thank you everyone for joining. Want to wish everyone Bezos Hashem. Tonight is the yahrzeit of Rav Meir Baal Hanes, so we should be zoiche el akad Meir Aneni, and only Yeshua's v'nachamos, Agun Shabbos. Thank you for joining. We're going to stop the recording here, and if anyone has questions, you're welcome to ask. Baruch Tia. Thank you.
The network bandwidth was low, so it stops and it starts and it stops and it starts.
Okay, we'll try to.
That's the message I got on my screen.
Okay, we'll try to get that straight. Shkayach.
Okay, have a good night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, shkoyach. Kol tov, everyone.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.